Brantford's first post office opened in 1825. In 1841, it was located on the north side of Colborne Street, just west of King Street. In 1850, it moved farther east down Colborne to the corner of Market Street. And in 1856, the post office was located on George Street within the Kirby House block. Finally, in 1880, a permanent home for it was built at 41 George Street at a cost of $35,000. Mail was delivered to private boxes at the post office, for those who could afford it, or it could be picked up at the wicket. 6 carriers started house-to-house delivery of the mail twice a week on January 5, 1898. Soon after, a general system of street letter boxes began. In 1899, there were 15 of these boxes, and by 1909, there were 51, with 3 pickups per day. The staff at this point consisted of Postmaster Raymond, Deputy Postmaster J.C. Montgomery, and 12 clerks. There was a need for a larger building, so the former Watrous Engine Works site on Dalhousie Street was chosen. Built at a cost of $30,000, the cornerstone was laid in 1913 and officially opened on June 17, 1915. As Brantford grew, the number of frame buildings increased, and as did the threat of fires breaking out. The Grand River supplied the water to fight these fires, but it tended to freeze in the winter, which made access to water very difficult. In 1849, Ignatius Cockshut and Duncan Mackay dug a well on the north side of Colborne Street and installed a pump for the purposes of fighting these fires. The construction of 6 cisterns took place in 1861. They were 12 feet in diameter and were to contain no less than 10 feet of water. They were at the corners of Queen and Wellington, Sheridan and Market, West and Nelson, Palace and Crown, Mill and Colborne Street, as well as Dalhousie Street near the Congregational Church. On February 7, 1870, Council approved the expenses for a waterworks company to build or purchase buildings, pumps, machinery, pipes, and 10 hydrants. Ignatius Cockshut, T.S. Shenstone, William Buck, H.W. Breather, and H.B. Leeming formed such a company shortly after. A small pumping station was built on Colborne Street at Clarence, and the town would only pay for the pipes for firefighting purposes. It wasn't until 1886 that the city of Brantford, incorporated in 1877, provided drinking water to its citizens. The congregation at First Baptist was constituted on December 23, 1833, with 26 members. They first met in a wood frame building on the north side of Colborne Street, which was purchased by Jedediah Jackson. Services were held in 1834 in a new frame church on West Street opposite Chatham. A meeting was held in 1853 to discuss the construction of a new church. This was opened in 1855, but destroyed by fire 2 years later. John Turner was the architect for the new building, which was completed and opened in 1857. In 1845, churchgoers petitioned to form a congregation and purchase the property on the northeast corner of Wellington and George Street. The American Presbyterian Church had begun a church there that, when completed, became the First Presbyterian Church. The building was removed and replaced with a new structure in 1878. When the congregation dissolved in 1901, the building was taken over by the Young Women's Christian Association, redesigned, and called Victoria Hall. It was sold to the city in 1959, demolished, and replaced with the new City Hall in 1965. Built in 1857, Zion Presbyterian Church was designed by John Turner as well, with additions in 1867, 1882, 1927, and 1934. Reverend William Cochran, who preached for the church for 36 years, was instrumental in founding the Young Ladies' College and was a faculty president. He lived at 57 Charlotte Street, the current home of the Brant Museum and Archives, from 1883 until his death in 1898. The church was renamed Zion United in 1925 and then St. Andrew's United Church in 1995. After the Brant Hotel burnt down in 1853, Joe James moved the operation to the north side of Colborne Street. A Mr. Bingham bought the hotel in 1865 and renamed it the Bingham House. It was later renamed the Prince Edward Hotel. and during Prohibition, the building was turned into apartments. The building did reappear as a hotel once Prohibition was over, though it was torn down in 1987. There was a wood frame hotel at 122-134 Dalhousie Street, opposite the Market Square before 1859. This was likely the Trips Hotel, which was replaced by the Pepper House in 1860. In 1869, J.C. Palmer bought the new building and renamed it the Commercial Hotel, though he later sold the operation to an H. Westbrook in 1872. On March 24, 1902, James Quirk, the hotel keeper and husband of Westbrook's daughter, was found dead, thought to have been murdered, in the stable behind the hotel. The case was never solved, and the hotel was later sold to Frank Cockshut, who turned it into stores and apartments. The Park Hotel was built at 70 Market Street in 1859. Purchased by Simon James in 1899, it was resold and renamed the Bodega Hotel in 1904. The Bodega was known for its fine dining, white table linens, and good food. It was destroyed by fire on March 4, 1962, and the site is now home to the downtown branch of the TD Bank. George Fleming operated the Brant House at 24 King Street from 1859 to 1871. In 1899, the site was home to a billiards and carriage shop, and the Imperial Hotel operated there from 1902 to 1916. Again, the building was demolished in 1957. The Brantford Courier was printed on the upper floor of Thomas Lemon's home, which was the future location of the Bell Memorial, before the business was relocated to a brick building on the corner of King and Dalhousie Streets. In February 1860, a fire which started at a nearby store destroyed the Courier's machinery and some of its older files. And Henry Lemon, Thomas's son, had taken over management of the newspaper a number of years prior to his father's death. Henry later married a Harriet Martin, a widow from England, who wrote articles for the newspaper. Major Lemon retired in 1890 when two nephews of his wife, Ralph H. and F. Douglas Revel, took over as partners in the newspaper. Henry Lemon died in April 1902, after which a Mr. W. J. Southam of Hamilton purchased the newspaper in 1918, though sold the subscription list to the Expositor a few weeks later. The final issue of the Brantford Courier was published on December 28, 1918. The first edition of the Brantford Conservative Expositor, a weekly newspaper, was published on October 12, 1852, with Henry Racy as the owner. The newspaper was published on Tuesday mornings at Racy and Mayor's bookstore and job office on Colborne Street. The first edition of the Daily Expositor was published on April 3, 1873, with H. F. Gardner as the editor. The following year, W. C. Trimble and William Watt, Jr. bought the newspaper, and when Mr. Trimble retired in 1878, Mr. Watt took over full control of the newspaper. The business was in several different locations before moving to a building on Colborne Street at the foot of George Street in 1883. By 1885, the Expositor was the first newspaper in Brantford to publish an illustrated edition to celebrate the opening of the John H. Stratford Hospital. The following year, they published another elaborate issue to commemorate the unveiling of the Brant Memorial. T. H. Preston, managing editor of the Winnipeg Sun, bought the newspaper in 1890. By this time, the premises were too small, so Mr. Preston bought land from E. H. Webbling at the corner of Dalhousie and Queen Street, and a new building was erected in 1895. Mr. Preston, who served as the member for South Brant in the Ontario Legislature from 1899 until 1908, continued to run the newspaper until his death on November 7, 1925. The Widow's Home had its beginnings in Brantford around 1868. It wasn't until Ignatius Cockshut donated a home for this purpose in 1873 that there was a permanent site for this organization. This institution provided care for the city and county's aged and homeless Protestant women. In 1909, the Widow's Home had 15 residents. In 1887, the city council arranged for the building of a house of refuge. The following year, Ignatius Cockshut donated 45 acres of land on Mount Pleasant Road, outside of city limits, to house the building. Schultz Brothers completed the construction in the fall of 1888, and the staff there could care for a maximum of 75 patients at a time. In 1901, the Cockshut family deeded 19 acres of land to the city in memory of Ignatius, as well as $1,000 to assist in improvements to the site. The city named it Agriculture Park, and on the premises there was an arena that hosted lacrosse, baseball, and football games. The name was later changed to Cockshut Park. Brantford was wild about miniature golf in the 1920s, and Pickwick Park was converted into an elaborate miniature golf course to meet the demand for the popular game. The park was later entirely redesigned as a park of formal gardens and renamed Lorne Park. What we now know as Mohawk Park was under the ownership of the Brantford Street Railway when it first opened for business in 1895, on Victoria Day. The attractions included a water chute ride, 28 towboats, canoes, bicycle boats, and a bicycle racetrack. There was also a fully equipped photographic studio that allowed patrons to take home souvenirs of their day out, and a refreshment stand that offered a variety of goodies and seasonal fresh fruit. In 1904, a merry-go-round was placed in the park but was later sold by the city. The park was purchased by the city of Brantford in 1915 and renamed Mohawk Park. The grand reopening of the park was on Labor Day in September 1915, and it had more than 4,000 people in attendance. East Ward School, often dubbed the Darling Street School, was built in 1853. The school was demolished and replaced by a new building in 1907 at the cost of $30,000. This new building, Alexandra School, was 3 stories high and covered most of the block, and its doors were permanently shut on June 20th, 1975. In 1913, the Homedale School on Morrell Street was abandoned and the property sold to the Lake Erie and Northern Railway for a right-of-way. A new school was built to replace it a year earlier, in 1912, and this was located on Walnut Street. This new school was named Dufferin School in honor of Lord Dufferin, the Governor-General of Canada from 1872 to 1879. The Brantford Street Railway officially opened to the public in September of 1886 with free rides for everyone. At first, there were only 6 cars, 4 open and 2 closed, and it cost 5 cents a trip. They operated using horse-drawn cars before the electric lines were installed, and they had 14 horses in operation. The electric cars were introduced in 1893, with new tracks laid from the city to Paris that year, and that line was later extended from Paris to Galt. In 1914, the city of Brantford took over the interurban lines operated by the Grand River Railway, and in 1918, the Paris to Galt line was discontinued. In 1929, the buses gradually replaced trolley cars. In 1939, the change from streetcars to buses was complete, and a year after that, in 1940, the last streetcar was retired from service. J.S. Howie and J.C. Feely began their hardware business in 1887. They sold stoves and building materials, in addition to their work in tinsmithing. The hardware store later added a complete stock of general hardware, paints, oils, and glass. It also specialized in steam and hot water heating and plumbing. Due to the success of the business, a second location was opened at 430 Coburn Street, but in 1912, both Coburn Street locations were amalgamated into one location on Dalhousie Street. In 1916, Mr. Howie transferred ownership to his sons, who kept the business in operation until 1926. Austin E. Burke purchased the R.S. Dunlop Mineral Water Company in 1908 and changed its name to the Burke Mineral Water Company. He produced soft drinks, ginger beer, as well as mineral water, and this company closed in 1941. The Beatty Washer Store on Coburn Street was run by an A.G. Mitchell. The store was on the south side near Cove Street and was founded in 1929. The Brant Avenue Tea Shop was located at 174 Brant Ave and was owned and operated by Joseph Bowes. The site later was home to Eddie's, a well-known corner store whose claim to fame was having the first electrical ice cream refrigerator in Brantford. Well, that's all for our journey through some well-known Brantford locations. Join us next week as we learn a little bit about Brantford's industrial past. The majority of this information came from a Brant Historical Society publication entitled Brantford, A Passage Through Time by Stacey McKellar and Cindy McDonald. Copies are available for loan through the Brantford Public Library. Thanks for listening.